Wonderful. Well, Tim, welcome to the Where the Climate Things Are podcast. Thank you for being on.
Well, thank you for having me, Addie. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. I'm glad you reached out. I think a couple weeks ago we got in touch, and I'm so excited to hear a little bit more about the work that you're working on currently, and also selfishly very excited to ask you about a shared passion for fly fishing that we both have. That will be something we get into as well. But I was just wondering, I think to start, I would love to have you introduce yourself in whatever way you want to take that today.
Okay. Yeah. I'm Tim Weed, and I'm primarily a writer, but I'm also kind of a former and still to some degree current international educational travel guide, you
Cool.
might say. Particularly in Spanish-speaking countries. But I also teach. I teach in an MFA writing program and at Grub Street in Boston, which is a writing center. So I have one of those careers that is lots of different things. And I'm also, I guess I should also say, I'm also someone who, one of the reasons I was attracted to your thing that you're doing is because I'm also an outdoors person who really, I try to incorporate that into my writing, and I'm very concerned about climate change. So it really seemed like something that was right up my alley. So
Absolutely. Well, that's great to hear, because that is exactly the thesis of the podcast, is really activating. I mean, there's so many folks. Yeah, I should say the thesis is actually that like people that want to be outside in nature also want to protect it. So there's a lot of folks out there like us that care a lot about climate change and also love to be recreating in the outdoors. And yeah, so I'm glad you made your way here, and really excited to talk about your work. And I have had, I think, one other climate fiction writer on, but not in like a book. Maybe she's working on a book, but it was kind of really intriguing to learn more about you and your work, and kind of more the longer form storytelling that you work on, which we'll dive into for sure. But I do want to ask you initial question that I ask everybody on the podcast that comes on, is sort of this idea around an aha moment. What was your aha moment on climate or environment, would you say? And we can go as far back as you want to go with that.
Well, we'd have to go pretty far back because I've been concerned about climate, the climate crisis for a long time. Well before Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. I guess if there's an aha moment, it was I had been living abroad. I had been teaching college semester abroad programs in Spain and Australia and Venezuela, and came back to the U.S. to Vermont, where I am now, and started getting back into my old passion, which was Nordic skiing. I was a Nordic high school racer, and I've always loved skiing of any kind. But Nordic skiing is something that here in Vermont that we do a lot of, and so I really got into it. I really got back into it, and I just love doing it. I try to do as many days as I can during the winter, and I started thinking about, what is climate doing to our winters, and what does that mean for this beautiful season that I love? And so that was, if there's an aha moment, it was probably moving back to the U.S. and realizing how in love I am with winter, and how I'm really sad about the idea that we might be, in some way losing winter or losing the winter like we once knew. So,
which is exactly I don't know if you're familiar with the nonprofit Protect Our Winters, which is probably something you're familiar with as a skier. And it's interesting talking to them, because they're a supporter of, I'm on their Creative Alliance, and they're a supporter of various events that Where the Climate Things Are is put on. So big fans of POW over here, as we call them. But I spoke to the CEO about a year ago at this point, and she sort of laughed and said, it's an interestingly named nonprofit, because it is founded by Jeremy Jones, the skier, to protect our winters. And like, that was also his aha moment, similar to yours, around like a specific sport, a specific season, but obviously so relevant to across all seasons and all sports, and also just in general, kind of the climate crisis affecting so many parts of obviously, yes, again, outdoor recreation, but past the winters, I guess. And so she was sort of like, at some point we need to clarify that we're not just focused on ski season. We're also focused on, any athletic pursuits in the outdoors, but what a poignant aha moment for, and again, for that nonprofit too, of like, this is a sport that will be directly impacted by seasonal change and by global warming as well. So thank you for sharing that aha moment. I think it's interesting to go back with people, to see like how far back that might've been. And in that vein, I would love to ask you, before we kind of come forward to present day and what you're working on right now, I'd love to ask you a little bit more. I mean, you mentioned your passion for outdoor recreation. You've also, as I researched and you just mentioned it, like you've traveled extensively all over the world, teaching and, being involved in these semester abroad programs. Talk a little bit about your background and sure, maybe how you got into writing and when writing kind of came into that fold too. But I'd love to hear about, like your international career thus far and how that maybe connects into nature, if it does at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long road. When I was a little kid, when I was like 6 or 7 years old, my family, my father was working on a doctoral thesis for the University of Denver, DU, and we got in our 1966 Volvo station wagon and drove from Denver down to Belize through Central America, and we spent a year living in Belize City and and exploring all of Central America in this old station wagon, and it was a really formative experience for me because it was this idea, well, wow, I mean, it's a big world, and so the international side really came in as a result of that. And I actually in college I was a Spanish major and studied abroad quite a bit in Spain and Mexico and Jamaica and other places, and just kind of got the bug. And so I started working internationally, leading student travel programs, educational travel programs around the world, and then got a job. I went to graduate school and got a degree in international environmental policy, actually, at the University of California. And after that, got a job as directing these college semester abroad programs. And that one thing led to another, and that led to a lot of other jobs in international education, and I ended up working for National Geographic and other organizations that are really this idea of educational travel. And to some degree, I still do that. I have my own little company where I do trips to especially Spanish-speaking countries, especially Cuba. But, I've got another trip coming up to Peru, and I spend a lot of time in Spain and stuff like that. So that part of it has been big for me. And then the outdoor part of it is sort of another track. Like I grew up in a family that was always very engaged in the outdoors. We did a lot of camping. We did a lot of hiking. It was just something that was part of my upbringing. I was the kind of kid who'd spend all day outside and come home after dark. It was just sort of like the outdoors was everything, and it still is. It's something that I really tried to spend as much time outside as I can every single day. And so the travel and the outdoor and, the outdoor orientation sort of came together as part of my upbringing, I'd say.
Got it. And were you did you grow up in Denver, it sounds like, or
I grew
Colorado?
My parents were young when they got married, and they moved around a lot. So, we lived in Denver. I was actually born in Vermont. We came back, and my parents taught at a school in upstate New York in Lake Placid. And then we moved all around. So, Denver, New Hampshire. My dad lives in New Hampshire now. I live in Vermont. My mom lives in Denver, or not in Denver, in Colorado, and my brother lives in Utah. So I have kind of roots in both.
Everyone's around everywhere. Well, I have to ask too, I'm familiar with Putney Student Travel. Did you move to Putney for this, or is this anyways connected? Okay.
It's totally connected. So I was a leader. I was a Putney Student Travel leader. If you know what that is. That was how, when I first got out of college, I started, because I was a Spanish major. So I started leading these language immersion trips for Putney to Spain and Latin America and everywhere. And then when we were directing these college semester abroad programs, and my wife Julie we got pregnant, so we wanted to come back to the USA. So I called the directors of Putney Student Travel. I said, "Hey, you got any jobs in Putney?" And they're like, "Yeah, come on back." So I started working in the office of Putney Student Travel, and I worked there for many years, as I was also focusing on becoming a novelist. So
cool. Okay, because when you said Putney, that was obviously the sort of like the name that rang a bell. But in Maine, I never did like Overland. I think that's the bike company, but actually two leaders from Overland went to Maine and formed what's now Apogee Adventures, which is a bike. It's like much smaller, but actually I feel like they've gotten quite big. Sort of a summer touring bike touring situation. And I did a few of those trips as a young person, and then led trips when I was older. And so I just have a real affinity for, I didn't ever lead with them internationally. They do have international trips, but I just have an affinity for like the trip leader mindset,
such a
because it's
cool
hard. It's so cool.
It's so much responsibility for someone just out of college. You're giving a budget, you have notes, and then you're just supposed to put this thing together. And you are also in loco parentis, so you have tons of legal responsibility for these kids.
Oh yeah.
So it's one of the best jobs. I highly recommend it for anybody who's.
It's so fun. I remember, the summer I only led one summer, but I did a bike trip in Montana, and then we did a hiking trip in Washington. And actually that's now where I'm based. I'm based out in Washington and Seattle. And it's so funny because I look out every day and I'm like, oh, the Olympics, that's where we did that trip. And the Cascades, we also did the trip there. And so it's very fun to think back, but you're right. It's like the most responsibility. And I do think but the summer was incredible. I love camping, and I slept outside in a tent like most of the nights that summer because we were on the road, and it was just such a fun experience, and you kind of get done with it. And I feel like I had like a reemerge. I had to like be like, oh, I have to come back into real life now. Like, when you're on a trip, it really feels like your whole world is surrounding that. So anyways, that's very cool that you're involved in Putney.
Absolutely.
I love that.
Everything you just said, I totally agree with. It sounds fun.
Yeah.
I miss those days of being a trip leader, actually.
I do too. Yeah. I think about that where I'm like, I love the singular focus of, and I can't imagine what it was like internationally. It sounds like you actually like cut your teeth that way. So I'm sure that's a whole other ball game. But I remember being like, okay, we're in Montana. We get from point A to point B today. Like, I got to get like, everyone's meal cooked. I got to get everybody, like we got to do end of the day reflections. Like the whole day just is formed around these wonderful kids you're watching, and like, making sure everybody's having a good time. And so really like, I think that's probably one of the most like singularly focused times in my life. Your brain just really goes towards trip leading. So I did appreciate that, even from like a mental standpoint. But
it's like a field-based job. It's sort of like being in a way, it's like being a general, or being somebody, an aid worker or something, where you're totally focused on the field, and you've got the relations with the local community, and then the group dynamics and the group, and so it's a very all-consuming job.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I kind of got into it through leading outdoor trips in college. These were like 5-day or 3-day kind of situations, but I had my woofer, then my woofer, and I was sort of like come from as being a camper on these trips, and I did summer camp in Maine, kind of the like all girls camps in Maine. There's so many of them, but I did one of those, and then like after, when I started to talk to these guys about actually doing this trip, they sort of like interviewed me without me knowing I was being interviewed. And then they were kind of like, well, hey, we'd like to hire you like as a former camper. Would you want to do this? Yeah. And I think having the medical training, like having the woofer background, which I've really sadly now let expire my woofer, which is kind of not a smart thing to do. But anyways, they needed somebody with, they need like an all kinds of different folks. They need the group dynamics folks. They need the people with kind of for us with bike trips, we had to have like, my co-leader was so good at changing flats and all the bike mechanics pieces that I did not have. And so I just think it's also interesting. Like, we could have a whole other conversation about this, but like pairing co-leads together, right? Mm-hmm. Making sure that dynamic works out, which is obviously like, you're really relying on each other for so much. And again, internationally, I'm sure that even gets heightened more. So anyways,
cool.
But yeah, very cool. Well, and then I was going to ask you too, like, so you said you were on the note of camping, outdoor recreation. Because we will touch on this, because your writing, I know, touches on this. Like, when did fly fishing come into your life? When did you discover that?
Yeah. So when I was, kind of growing up partly in Denver, and my grandfather was a doctor in Denver. Okay. And he was a member with a bunch of other doctors of this club, this fly fishing club. And they had this group of private lakes up near the Indian Peaks region, up above Boulder, called Los Lagos. And they used to take us up there. So we'd go up there to these private lakes in rowboats, and that's where I learned to fly fish. So I was a pretty young kid.
Wow.
Learning to do this in the most amazing possible circumstances for a kid. Just you're out there on the lake, and here you are, and there's fish. And so that became something that was, it was a great way to be introduced to it, and it's just something that I've continued to do. These days, I mostly fish when I go out west to visit my mom, I mentioned that she lives in Colorado near Ridgeway, and then my brother who lives in Utah. But also we spend a lot of time in Nantucket. So a lot of the fly fishing I do these days is saltwater fly fishing, which is kind of a whole new ballgame. Yes. But yeah, it's been kind of a constant in my life. And actually one of my first, my second book, which is a collection of stories, is called A Field Guide to Murder and Fly Fishing. Which kind of leads people astray because it's really not a book about fly fishing. It does have some fly fishing in it, but the murder and the fly fishing, they're kind of metaphors.
I see. Okay. Yeah. It's an intriguing title. I'm also a fly fisher. Yes. And so I got, I similarly had early access and exposure to it. My dad is a huge fly fisherman in Maine. He really wanted all of his 3 kids to be fly fisher kids as well. And I think none of us really picked it up then. Well, I mean, I remember doing it and having kind of like my kiddo rod. And I think it was not, I don't even know when I had my first fly rod. I know my first fly rod was like kind of shorter, a little smaller. I was definitely like either a young teenager or something. I can't really remember when I fly fished for the first time. It was probably before that. But the big piece for me was I got back into it in the pandemic. I like moved to Maine, back to Maine, sort of not on purpose, which, you know, again, looking back, there's so many beautiful times in the pandemic, as hard as it was and as like challenging and anxiety producing as this pandemic was, and not to make light of any of what society experienced. But I did get the chance to kind of like move back to Maine, and my dad and I would go like every single weekend that first summer in 2020. And I got so into it. And I think, you know, I've done some saltwater fly fishing, and that's a really fun, as you said, it's a whole other ball game. But I feel I'm not quite a good, I was just telling someone this, I really like specific conditions, meaning I'm not great on the river. I haven't really figured out river fly fishing yet, like the trees and kind of like the sinking fly, moving the fly, and like kind of like not really seeing it. I love like dry fly, calm lake, like I can see the fish take my fly, like I'm very sort of like, and I was like, oh man, that means I'm kind of a fair weather fisher. But oh well, it's such a fun,
because it's not a competition, you know. So you should be out there in the conditions. I also love dry fly fishing. I'm not that, I mean, I think that I do some, you know, nymphing and stuff like that, but I'm not that tied to the idea of whether I catch something or not. It's just, I love just being out there. And if there is a condition like that where you can pop a little, you know, a little dry fly on the surface and let the trout come up, there's nothing like it.
Isn't. It's true. And when we were emailing, I was up in Rangeley area of Maine, like right by the Canadian border, which is like, that's where we grew up fishing. We have a little cabin. My dad has a cabin up there, and it is like world class. Like the fishing there is pretty incredible. So I've been up there. I've been to fishing spoiled.
We used to go to Little Kennebago Lake. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah, Kennebago Lake is where that's it. Yeah, oh my gosh,
incredible. Yeah, I mean,
funny.
The brook trout, the enormous brook trout, and those landlocked salmon. I mean, it's incredible. Yeah,
that's literally where I grew up. Grants was my first. That's like, but when I was picturing myself with that little fishing rod, that's like the docks of Grants was where I was.
Wow,
so that's
what a place to grow up. Gorgeous. Yeah,
very beautiful. So, anyways, it's wonderful to find, you know, a shared passion like that. And I also think it's interesting, again, a different conversation for a different time, but how few women are in fly fishing. It's always fun to like come to meet more women and realize that there is a community of women that are out there. But I grew up kind of around my dad and his, you know, fishing buddies, and not a lot of like women representation out there. So I'm sure that's a whole other, some days I'm like, man, maybe I'll just go be like a female fishing guide, and like that will be my other life trajectory. Sounds kind of good, right? Yeah. But that's awesome. Well, I think I'm curious now to ask a little more too about your writing career, because you mentioned, you know, moving back to Vermont. You also mentioned this like very mysteriously titled book, which I'm just like so excited to dive into as well, because as you said, like metaphors maybe are more like murder and fly fishing are more metaphors. But when I saw that, I realized like it seems like you've really had this this writing career, whether it's on the side or even like front and center of what you've been doing. I'm curious both about like how you got into writing and how that came to be in your life, and also like starting to transition into like, when did climate start entering into that? And like, how did the climate awareness kind of, obviously you shared your aha moment, but like, when did climate writing kind of like come into focus for you too?
So I got my start when I was 6 years old. I wrote an epic novel that was 11 pages long. It was about an otter. It was about an adventurous otter. It was called Ottaga.
That sounds great.
Yeah, I mean, my sister typed it up. I think it still exists somewhere. But so that was when I was 6, and then after that, I sort of took a break from fiction writing. Writing was always really important to me, and I always loved writing and reading. I think most writers are avid readers, and that's really how I got into it. Reading The Lord of the Rings and Hobbit and the Chronicles of Narnia and all of these great books that really gave me an escape.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I wanted to, so that's how I got into it was by reading. But when I had the time that I mentioned, when it was kind of a pivotal time when I had been leading this kind of adventurous lifestyle of doing educational travel and trips abroad and semesters abroad and stuff like that. And then I came back, started a family, and I was like, oh, okay, what am I going to do? Because I was working in an office. I mean, it's a cool office, but it was an office. And I was like, I need to do something creative. And I was like, okay, I'm going to come back to this writing thing. I'm in my late 20s at this point. And, so I started writing. I joined a writer's group. I really started working on the craft of writing fiction. I realized how hard it was, and we can talk about that because that's one of the things I love about it is how hard it is to really bring something alive on the page. But I started to publish short stories, and then I went back and got my MFA. My second graduate degree was an MFA in writing from Warren Wilson down in North Carolina, and just started writing novels. And so that's how, and it's become a real passion of mine. It's really sort of my central creative passion is writing fiction. And and so the other part of the question, also climate. Well, so part of what I try to do in my writing, I mean, if I can actually just tell you a quick story. So one time I was in Cuba. I was leading one of these National Geographic trips in Cuba, and I was kind of jaded. It was like, oh God, another trip. You're doing these crowded itineraries where you're doing the same thing over and over. It gets a little boring. And I would sort of hide out from the group and I do my own thing. One night I was doing that. I was having dinner on my own in a little place called Trinidad in Cuba. I don't know if you've been there.
Okay. I haven't.
Trinidad is crazy beautiful.
Paint the picture. Okay. Yeah.
It's like, it's a World Heritage Site. It's like this. It's like Brigadoon.
Okay.
There were no roads built there until after the 1950s. So it was an old sort of pirate place, an old port of sugar production and things like that. So it's like a time capsule. It's this beautiful city on a hill that's like all cobblestone streets and all of this incredible 19th century architecture. And then you look through the windows and there's 19th century furniture everywhere. It's just it's like nowhere else in the world. So anyway, I was there and I was having dinner and there was a blackout, and it was a real revelation. The blackout happened, and all of a sudden, I realized where I was. I mean, I knew where I was, but I had that real sense of topographical awareness. You know how you get when you're camping out for 3 or 4 days at a time or more, or you're on a river or something like that, and you start to feel in tune with where you are. You know exactly where you are on the planet. It's like this topographical awareness. I was looking out at the Caribbean Sea. There were no lights anywhere. There were horses going down and up and down these cobblestone streets. And I was looking at the stars above and I was like, holy crap, it's almost like it didn't sink in where I was topographically. And I realized that that's part of what I try to do in my writing. My writing is really about celebrating the human relationship with nature. And there's a lot to fiction. It's very dark and stuff like that, but it's celebrating this interaction between humans and nature. And so I realized that's kind of what I try to do in my writing. And then so climate, I don't know if I have written some stories that are explicitly about climate. And this most recent novel, The Afterlife Project, it's considered a cli-fi or climate fiction novel.
Yeah.
But it was almost like if you have this relationship with nature and you're alive as a human being on the world today, you can't help but notice what's going on with the climate, and not only the climate, but also the biodiversity crisis, the habitat loss, and all of these this kind of multi-pronged environmental crisis that we're facing. So that kind of creeps in. So it was kind of a natural transition, but it was as a result of this preoccupation I've always had with the outdoors, with nature, and trying to bring that alive in fiction, because I feel like a lot of humans these days are cut off from that. And what I realized in that blackout in Cuba was it's not only the screens, it's not only the phones, and the fact that we're so screen addicted. It's also just electricity that through a background with the lights and everything else. We don't often turn everything off and just look and understand, feel where we are. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was kind of a revelation for me. And it told me something about what I try to do with my writing. It wasn't that rational,
Yeah.
but that's the way it sort of came out.
No. Well, I
Yeah.
love that. I mean, first of all,
Yeah.
what an amazing aha moment for another thing, like, right, for
Yeah.
your writing and for your
Yeah.
realization of place, and everything you
Yeah.
just described is, and you mentioned this, but is kind of how I feel camping. There's this like I was
Yeah.
also talking to somebody recently about how early they said, oh, we went to bed so early when we were camping because,
Yeah.
it gets dark and it's 8 p.m. and you're all like,
Yeah.
oh, well, we had a nice campfire, let's go to bed. And I
Yeah.
think or sometimes obviously that's not even available. So it's like the interesting piece here of electricity, I think, is definitely right, where, there's very few times where, and sadly, it's been too long since I've been camping at this point. And I really feel like there is that, both the connection to topographical space, as you were saying, like where you're rooted, where you are, but also this, the kind of like connection into nature, or the feeling of being small in this vast universe. Like all those things are just so present when I think you literally and figuratively like turn the lights out
Yeah.
and sort of sit and see where the world is and where you are in
Yeah.
the world. So I love that.
It's
I mean,
got
I
to be
think,
effable,
yeah,
It's like, I don't know if
yeah,
you've heard of, have you heard of the 4-day rule? I don't,
no,
it's not a rule, but the 4-day
okay,
rule is,
yeah.
if you really want to feel that feeling, then you have to be in the wilderness for at least 4 days.
Oh,
So I
interesting.
felt it definitely
Huh.
on river trips, like 4-day river trips, where you're like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
when you get off a river trip like that, you're like, I don't want to go back. I have felt
Yeah.
something that is rare,
Right.
So if you can't for,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's 4 days or 3 days or whatever, but enough
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
so that you
Oh,
really
that's
feel
interesting.
those vibes, kind of
Yeah.
inhabiting. It's cool.
And that's how, I mean, we talked about this with trip leading too, but like I also feel that with my community that I'm camping with. So if I'm on a trip or if I'm in a group, I've done quite a few, like sort of, as I mentioned, like leading and being on 5-day camping trips, even through university and whatnot. And you're like, I definitely feel that. I think like 5 days is a transformative amount of time, a week of time. You come back out and I'm like, I don't want to leave. These are my new family. Like I remember being like, this is my family. This is who I want to be with. And you kind of have I think there's also really interesting, like, again, a different topic, but as a trip leader, I did learn of the, like, what is it? Forming, norming, storming, reforming, like, and I'm sure you did this as a Putney leader too, but it's like, to this day, I will realize, like, we had this at our footprints camp in Craftsbury last year that I was mentioning to you. Like, we had that whole arc happened, and by the end, we were family. I mean, and it was just like, wow, these are my people. But like, you have to go through that sort of phase of like, okay, I think, is it storming, or there's sort of norming? There's like a couple tension moments or whatever.
Storming, performing, or something like that.
Performing. That's what it is. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. And so, anyways, it's wild to me how I think nature, wilderness and natural spaces really cultivate that in group settings. And I'm sure you've seen, like, I can only imagine you've seen you've led so many groups and you've seen so many different group dynamics, but I do think there's something about being really out there together, out in the wilderness together, that also kind of like creates bonds that to this day, I have friendships from those times where I can call upon and be like, hey, like, I don't necessarily say this out loud, but I'm like, you've seen me, when we're like dirty and camping and like, no, there's nothing there anymore. There's no filters. Like, you're really out with each other in these spaces. So I think that's so cool. Okay, so Afterlife Project, we've hinted at it a few times. I'm so excited to ask you so many questions about this. But specifically, I wonder if we can just kind of start basic. Like, tell us all, for those listening to, like, what it's about, maybe how it came about, wherever you want to take that. And obviously, no, you don't need to spoil anything, but we'd love to learn about, like, what is the narrative, and then we can kind of get into some of the, like, cli-fi, climate fiction components of it too.
So it's interesting. I mean, I'll talk a little bit about what how I got the idea for it, and then I'll talk.
Please.
About so
Great.
So I had written, I had published 2 books of fiction. I had actually written other novels that hadn't been published, and I was looking for a new novel project. I was sort of like wanting to do something new, and I wanted it to be big. I wanted it to be sort of ambitious. I wanted it to have elements of climate crisis, biodiversity crisis. I wanted to think about things like human the human species, the prospects for the survival of the human species, things like geological time. I mean, really big things. And there were two reasons for that. One was because I was thinking about all that stuff, and writing for me is therapeutic, and sort of thinking, okay, how am I going to, I was feeling, kind of anxious and depressed about the future. And I was like, okay, I want to write it for that reason, but also because I thought it was an aesthetic challenge. I mentioned before that I really love the challenge of writing fiction. Because what you're doing with fiction is a lie. You know it. The reader knows it. The writer knows it. The reader knows it. So that there has to be a reason to read it. It has to be, one, entertaining. It has to be immersive, and it has to get at some kind of deeper truth. And it has to be alive on the page. And so that kind of challenge is something that I find really inspiring. And in this case, I was like, can I take these big ideas and make them work in the context of a novel that also works dramatically and that works as a way to as an immersive document that is alive on the page. So it was a big aesthetic challenge. And I didn't really know how I was going to do this. So I was at the time working for National Geographic. I was what was called a featured lecturer. So my job was to go on these trips, these amazing trips, and to give a series of illustrated lectures on historical figures and different things having to do with the trip, to sort of enrich the trip for the people traveling on the program. So it was a cool job in that way. So I was on this trip in South America, in Tierra del Fuego. It was a very cool trip. Part of it was a small ship expeditionary cruise from Ushuaia, Argentina, around Cape Horn, up through the Beagle Channel, and ending in Punta Arenas, Chile. And the whole time we're on this little ship. There are probably 150 people aboard, and we see no other human beings. We see lots of seabirds. We see this incredible life, this incredible landscape. Tierra del Fuego is amazing.
I've been to Ushuaia too, actually. I know it. I love it. I love it.
Absolutely, like nowhere else in the world. One of the most remote wilderness
areas. It's one of my favorite places I've ever been. Yeah.
Me too.
Yep. Yeah.
So anyway, I was on this ship, and there were some interesting passengers aboard. There were a couple of scientists in particular. One of them was an astrophysicist who was actually University of Hawaii. He was head of the Mauna Loa Observatory, the director of the Mauna Loa Observatory.
Okay. Wow.
And another one was a paleoclimatologist from Princeton. And so I was talking to these two guys, and I was like, I want to write this book, and it's going to be something to do with the future. And, what do you think about that? And so we came up with this idea with the astrophysicist of one-way time travel I was sort of like, well, what do you think? One-way time travel? Could you do it? And he said, yeah, think about it. If we're already talking about exploring space, right? To getting to the nearest star, Proxima Centauri. This is the nearest star that might have a planet that would be habitable, like human colonization of a planet. That takes, at the speed of light, just under the speed of light, that takes 10,000 years. And so we would need to be able to keep someone alive for 10,000 years. And this is how we do it. So he started doing calculations on a napkin. He was like, so quantum physics, quantum computers, general relativity, all this other stuff. And so he came up with a mechanism, and I won't go into it now because it's a little technical, but it's in the book. And this mechanism to send a test subject 10,000 years into the future. I'm like, thank you. That is exactly what I needed. That was like permission to write this book about the deep future.
Whoa.
So then I was talking to the paleoclimatologist, and I'm like, so what do you think the climate is going to be like in 10,000 years? He said, well, this is what, no matter what scenario we're under with the IPCC scenarios, whatever, it's going to be, the next 200 or 300 years are going to be really hard. All of the, fossil fuels, we're either going to burn them all or we're going to stop burning them all. But the climate is baked in, the next 200 to 300 years are going to be really tough.
Right. There's even if we did cap it, there's like a bounce back effect, right? Exactly. Or like some sort of what I'm doing, the graph.
We reach a peak, right? And the peak of the concentrations of greenhouse gases. And then we reach this peak in a relatively short period of time. And then it starts to slowly decline back to pre-industrial norms. And so if you're talking about, he's saying, if you're talking about 10,000 years from now, you would be sort of on that trajectory down back to pre-industrial norms. It would probably be quite a bit warmer than it is now, but on that downward trajectory. And so this was like, okay, this is great. Now, so what that did is it sort of framed my research, and that's when I really started working on the book. That's what gave me the inspiration. Also the fact that it was taking, these conversations were taking place in this incredible remote wilderness area. And I was like, what would the planet be like without human beings? And so basically the story, the premise of the story is that it's two parallel timelines. There's one test subject who gets sent 10,000 years into the future to figure out, to see if there are any surviving humans, and to sort of try to, if there are, to try and put them on a better trajectory than the trajectory that got us to this point. And then there's the one that's back in 2068 when the world is really in trouble. There's been lots of climate stuff that has happened, terrible climate stuff. There's been, problems with the food system. There's been a huge, what they call a hyper pandemic that has really put the fate of humanity into question. And so you've got this group of scientists on one track who's going on this voyage to try and find another test subject to send in the future. And then you have the timeline of the scientist, the microbiologist, who's living 10,000 years into the future trying to search for human survivors. So that's basically the premise of the story. It's pretty far out. It's very different than anything I've written, but that's what it is.
I mean, no, and I think I love how far out it is, because I think you sometimes need to, like, I come from like a design thinking background, and we kind of talk about the like flaring and focusing. And if you go pretty far this way, you're going to come back to something that might feel a little more like there's kernels of truth to what you were saying too. Like you kind of sometimes have to go far out to come back to the truth. I wanted to ask you, like, before talking about some of the like climate fiction and what can we do with climate fiction and stuff, but like the other conversation I have with the climate fiction writer on this podcast, Zoe Young, I like had a moment in the conversation where I started to get emotional about something she was talking about. And I guess, like, I have to ask you, you said like you were feeling anxious and depressed about like the future and the state of the world. I don't know how to ask this without it being leading question, so maybe it will come out that way, but like, how did you feel writing this? Like, did it help you? Did it stress you out more? Like, what was your emotional journey writing this book?
It was a very clear emotional journey. It helped me quite a bit because it gave me a lot of perspective. Particularly this idea, and I've mentioned geological time and my conversations with the paleoclimatologist. I read a lot of books in the process of writing this novel about geological time. There's one in particular called The Ends of the World. It's by Peter Brennan, who's a paleoclimatologist. And it's about the 5 mass extinctions that the Earth has experienced so far. We're at the beginning of the 6th mass extinction. But it really, reading a book like that, I mean, first of all, the perspective of the history of Earth, 4.5 billion years. Do we even know what that means? I don't.
No.
I can't feel 4.5 billion years emotionally. I can't even imagine a million years. I mean, which is nothing. And so on the scale of geological time, it's pretty, we're just a blip, right? So that's one part of the perspective. The other part of the perspective is looking at these 5 mass extinctions, all of which were, to one degree or another, caused by concentrations of greenhouse gases. But the concentrations of greenhouse gases that caused these other mass extinctions were much higher than what we're going to experience, even in the worst case scenario. Our problem is it's just happening so quickly. That's our problem, is that it's happening so quickly that a lot of species are not going to have a chance to adapt. But in the case of all these mass extinctions, in some cases, more than 95% of all species completely wiped out. I mean, whole, branches of the family tree just wiped out, right? But life on Earth persists. And to me, that is the thing. It comes back. In the case, it always comes back.
Wow.
And so we are not in a position, and this was part of my sort of angst and depression that I felt about climate, was that here we are, and I still feel to a large degree, here we are, this one species, and we're causing these mass extinctions. We are putting ourselves at risk of wiping out the entire planet. That's not the case. We will not wipe out life on Earth. We may, and this is the part that to me is like morally unconscionable, we may, and already are to some degree, wiping out a lot of species that don't have to perish from the Earth, but we're making them do that because of our actions. And to me, that's a moral tragedy. But life on Earth is going to persist. And that's one of the things in this book. In the story is actually, a lot of people consider it to be a fairly dark story because it is, after all, about the extinction of the human species or the possible extinction, I'll put it that way. But I consider it to be, and I think a lot of people who've read it also consider it to be actually a cheerful book if you're someone who loves nature, because you see 10,000 years in the future, you see how things recover. There's another book that I read called The World Without Us. don't know if you've heard of this one.
No,
it's basically, it's a thought
this is
exercise
interesting.
where the
Yeah.
entire human species just disappears overnight. What happens to the earth? And it's amazing how quickly things recover. So that was, to me, that was kind of like, okay, now I have this perspective. And also just, I think, thinking about things that are tragic and things that bother you, really diving into them can help you gain the kind of perspective that, there's a saying from the Dalai Lama, something like, someone said, how do you keep smiling when so many terrible things are happening in life, in the world these days? And he says, well, you just have to try to participate joyfully in the sorrows of the world. And so that's my perspective now, is that, there's a lot of tragedy. There's a lot of terrible things. There's a lot that we need to try to work to change. But I'm still, you're still going to have your joy. You're still going to go fly fishing. You're still going to go skiing when there's snow. You're still going to try to enjoy life and love the people that are around you and, everything. So that's my perspective now. And I think so writing the book really helped. And I think actually reading the book, a lot of people have told me reading the book has been helpful for them too. And sort of taking a deep breath, understanding where we are, understanding that it's not serious. It is, but that, there's also a lot of good things as well. So,
yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing all that. I think there's a real power, like so many things you said. One, diving into the thing that scares you or stresses you out and actually researching it and sitting with it and, spending time there. Cause I think like the things that stress me out, when I am more stressed when I like separate myself from them than when I engage. And I think that's a really important point. And I also think, what an incredible perspective. And like, you're not the first person, as you might imagine. There's many folks that have come onto this podcast and talked about, and not just this podcast in general, and talking about like the world without us. Like the earth is okay without humans. It's like, are we going to survive? Does life persist? Which you've answered and you talk about. And I just think that there's such an interesting take here, because I think there's like a lot of climate narrative that really focuses on like human life and are we going to be okay? And like, should people have kids? Right. There's whole conversations around population and whatnot. And then you're like, well, wait a minute. What if we flipped it and talk about the earth and the planet? Like, we do, obviously people say the planet, but there's also sort of this, like, it's going to be okay when without us, it's okay. It's going to regenerate so fast. So it's like, that's like also a hard thought to sit with and be like, man, here we are talking about climate advocacy or whatever. And I'm like, well, maybe the best solution, this is a dark thought, but like maybe the best solution is like, if we're not here, like, how do you kind of, it's so interesting to like grapple with that too.
It's either that or what I sort of came away with is sort of my take home from the book is, the question. I think good literature asks questions more than it provides answers. But the question that I came away with is, are human beings going to be able to assume what I think of as our destiny? And our destiny is to move from being the exploiters to being the stewards of planetary life. That this is something that we come from the great stew of life that has evolved on this planet. We wouldn't exist if it weren't for that. Our traditions have us kind of separate and above it, but that's not the case. We're just part of it. Can we become the stewards rather than the exploiters of it? That to me, that's the optimistic side for human. So yes, it's true. If humans just disappeared, in many ways, that would be great for the rest of nature. But can we make it work as humans? Can we change our attitude and become sort of the protectors, or the stewards of nature? That's the question.
Yeah. Wow. There you go. That is a great question. That's a way better reframing of what, like what was going on in my head. That's a great way to kind of answer that. And I think too, I love that you were saying, like, when readers come to your book, like come to this story, there's this message around nature and around stewardship and around regeneration and whatnot. And it obviously fits into those that, like, it fits in both to the outdoor recreation angle of like, how do we then steward nature ourselves, but also the joy piece. Like, I love that. I think for so many listeners, outdoor recreation is their joy. And it is for me, right? Like in varying forms, whether it's paddling or poorly Nordic skiing or running or whatever you have, fly fishing. But, there's this joy, like, I've heard, I don't know if you've read Braiding Sweetgrass, or in that kind of vein of like reciprocity, right? There's this reciprocity with the earth that like, that is a word that is coming up for me when you share all this, because it is sort of this way of like, how do we, it's like the idea of like being in right relationship with nature. How do we show reciprocity? How do we kind of model that in our behavior? And I love that, because as you could see, like hearing what you had to say, I immediately went to the like, okay, well then humans shouldn't be here. And it's like, well, wait.
Yeah.
We can do this in a way that is a reciprocal shared journey. But like there's it's not black and white. It's not a pendulum. It's like there is the middle ground of like, how do we work to become stewards? How do we work to become, we're not extracting, our relationship is not extractive. It is reciprocal. It is stewarding. And I like that framing.
I think
a lot.
Braiding Sweetgrass is a really important book in that regard, and other books like it that are talking about, the grateful harvest and just expressing gratitude. And because it's an example of what human beings have done before. There have been cultures that have done that, and that still do. And so it's a question of kind of shifting our paradigm so that we can become that kind of society. I mean, maybe it's optimistic. It is optimistic, but maybe it's possible. And that's where I think novels come in. I think, by the way, I think that's where storytelling comes in.
Okay. Interesting. Well, wait, I mean, continue with that. Because my next question was actually going to be, this kind of feeds into it. My next question was going to be like, what do you want readers to come away with from this story? And it sounds like some people have read it, and maybe there's like some darkness there, but there's also some interesting positivity coming out of it. Like, what do you want people to take take if you had choice?
Above all, because I'm a novelist first, right? I want them to feel like they have read an immersive adventure story, because that's what it is. It's sort of an immersive adventure story. It's got kind of a love story and all of that stuff, to feel like they've read something that is a novel. Like, God, I'm really glad I read that. I'm kind of sad that it's over, and it was a great story. But in terms of a lesson, I think it's what we were talking about, this idea of of shifting the paradigm, the real urgent need for us as human beings to shift the paradigm, to become, to become more the stewards rather than the exploiters of nature. And I think that's where stories come in, because I think that, I know you'll probably ask me about this, but I'll go ahead and say it, is that, facts and figures, climate, reality, it's very compelling, for you and I to look at that stuff and to read IPCC reports, to, read about the latest developments in the Antarctic, sea level rise. We're experiencing a terrible drought right now. I mean, it's all around us, right? But some people, facts and figures don't necessarily do the job, because they've got specific points of view, or maybe they haven't thought about it enough, or maybe they are succumbing to the kind of nihilism that you mentioned. Well, maybe there's nothing we can do. We're doomed, so there's nothing we can do. All of that can be addressed through storytelling, because if we are, human beings are a creature who develop differently than other creatures. And part of the reason that we are a little different than other creatures, I'm not saying that we're better or apart or above or anything, but we're weird as creatures. And one part of our weirdness is stories. Everything about our culture is constructed through narrative. And narratives were essential for our formation. They're the reason that we are sort of a dominant species now, is because we're able to tell ourselves stories that can help us understand the future, alternative futures. There's a lot of different ways to deal with all kinds of things. So when you tell a story to a human being, it creates this sort of firing of synapses. It creates this imaginative engagement that almost becomes. And this is why one of the reasons I love writing and reading novels, because a novel gives you a chance to experience the world from outside your own narrow point of view. You're experiencing it through a new point of view that is an alien point of view to you, through a character. You're sort of like, and this is people. That's the reason people crave fiction, because it gives you a chance to experience the world from a very different point of view. It's one of the reasons that they say fiction is really good for creating empathy, but also for shifting paradigms. Because if you have this experience, and if a novel is good, it's going to be emotional. You're going to live through this emotional experience almost as if you lived it. It almost becomes like a memory for you. And this is why stories and novels have the ability to change people's minds. They have the ability to shift the paradigm in a way that facts and figures maybe don't. So I feel like, I feel like what my goal is to sort of participate in the creation of a new mythology that will help us sort of go toward the future in a different way. Human beings that have a different destiny in our future.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's grandiose, and not one book is going to do it, but I think to be part of that,
I love that,
to be telling stories, whether it's fiction or just telling stories, or writing poems or making movies or whatever it is, you can be part of that, which is exciting. So.
Absolutely. Grandiose or not, I think it's great. You need to have, we need people aiming for those larger missions and goals, right? Visions, because if not, I think to me, it's like, sure, maybe grandiose is one word, but also at the same time, needed. So needed. Thank you for the work that you're doing, because we need this. And I think, I think it's a similar, we both come at this from a storytelling perspective. And I'm so excited to replay what you just said as I'm editing this, because I'm like, I needed to hear that for me too, as a storyteller, and realizing that the stories piece is what as a species sets us apart. And I don't even really think about that day to day. So that's really interesting. And you're right, Mike, and you've answered it, but the question was going to be around what is the role of climate fiction rather, kind of in this movement. And I think, exactly what you just said, there's so many pieces. And I was actually talking to somebody who works at Project Drawdown. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're kind of a nonprofit that works around drawing down carbon and whatnot. And, this friend of mine is the storytelling director there. And you're like, oh, that's a science-based organization. And yet you're really coming at it with how do you engage people? And as you said, facts and figures are one thing, and that's what they do really well. Their Project Drawdown, they do that really well. But then you have someone like my friend Matt coming in and changing the way that the organization relates to communities, relates to frontline communities, shares their stories, right? So it's not this sort of top-down scientific approach, which honestly both him and I on a podcast episode that has yet to be released, we were both sort of saying we're both climate people, and yet you talk to me for a few minutes about just science and my eyes admittedly glaze over. I'm not, I'm passionate about this topic, but I'm not somebody that, as in it as I am, I can't even say that I'm, an expert on any of these facts and figure kind of angles. So I think the expertise that we can bring then is as storytellers or as communicators is to do exactly what you just said. And there's so much room for that. And there's so much need for that too, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
So
I agree.
Yeah. As we wrap here, because we're almost at time, and I really appreciate your time, I wanted to ask you, so this is going to be a fun question because I will put a little bit of a parameter on it. I like to ask everybody on the podcast as an ending question, what is your favorite climate solution? And I do say on every episode, because we've often, as is with here, we've talked for a long time about maybe a climate solution that you're implementing. So I like to say, what is your favorite climate solution that's not your own? So in this case, that is not necessarily climate fiction or storytelling even, but I'll let you take that in what direction you want to. So yeah, that's my last question to you here today.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, this is not going to be very original, but I am really, so I do follow the science news the climate news in particular pretty avidly. Sure. And this idea that, despite what's happening in Washington these days, we are kind of in the grip of a really disastrous political administration from a climate perspective, not to mention all the other perspectives, but
sure.
But this idea that, in different parts of the world, despite, destructive policies toward renewable energy, it's gaining momentum of its own. It's gaining momentum because it is the cheapest way to do it. It's the most effective way to do it. It is something that's sort of it's kind of a snowball, that's rolling down the hill, and it's gonna, it's you can have policymakers fighting against it and just ridiculousness, but it's gaining a momentum all its own. So for me, and I just think that is the most exciting, with solar and wind and all of these great solutions. To me, it's a sort of the fact that the market is kind of taking over and it's becoming the solution of choice. And so it's almost I'm not saying we should be, we can't lay back and say, well, there's no more that we have to do, but it is just, it's an optimistic scenario for me that what's happening with renewable energy.
I love that. No, it's so great. Original or not, or what you said, it's that is real. I love when when like the most climate friendly solution is also the cheapest, the best for, we talk a lot about on here about like the kind of what's in it for me, or like a consumer, like if you're looking at it from like a purely consumer mindset, an economic mindset, like it's actually shown to be the cheapest option, and people are like, oh cool, yeah, I'll do that one, like great.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
with and without the incentives or whatever that are gonna be going away or whatever, which is again so insane. But I do, I love that. I love what you were saying, like the snowball. It's like it can't be stopped. It's out there, and it's actually like the best option for so many reasons. So
yes,
climate or not, like that's kind of the angle. Like with some of, it's funny. I have a hat that says heat pumps on it from, there's a great company called Quilt that they make these like heat pumps shirts and hats, and I was wearing this hat at home in Maine, and I bring this up because you're a fellow New Englander, and everyone there was like, my aunt was like, what's that mean, like what is that, I don't get your hat. And I was like, well, heat pumps, and we need more heat pumps. She's like, yeah, we all have heat pumps here. What are you talking about? Like, we've had heat pumps for years. And so it's just so funny, because I feel like there are certain pockets of the country or society even that are like, yeah, we've been doing this, like it's also cost effective. So that's what our choice has been. Tim, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate, everything that you shared. And I'll definitely be linking so much to different ways that folks can find the book. Both if anything's online, like other interviews you've done or other press you've done, as well as, finding the book itself. And I'm really excited, to be able to share a ton about this here. Is there on that note, is anything else I missed or forgot, or you want to share as sort of like the book tour continues?
No, I mean, the book tour's been great. I've been really happy with the reception. There's been a lot of great feedback from readers. You can find the book everywhere. It's, it's online. Cool. It's bookstores. You can go to my website, and I have a number of public events coming up. So cool. If you want to come out and see me in public, there's some literary festivals and book festivals that I'll be going to. You just go to my website, we.net, cool. and you can find all that stuff. But cool. I do want to say, thank you so much for having me on. It is really, I love what you're doing. Congratulations, and keep doing it. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate you having me on. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, Tim. Well, I appreciate those words more than you know, and really thank you for your time. And hopefully someday we get to go fly fishing together, or like meet in person.
I would love that. Let's go to the outdoors. I'll meet you up at Little Kennebago Lake.
Yes, please. Oh my gosh,
is amazing.
That'd be great. Yeah, that would be so fun. Well, thank you again, and we'll see you out on the road.
Okay.